Hi everybody! Today I would like to share with you a couple of drum recording hacks that I use very often in real recording sessions. Some are tools, some are fixes, and some are just overlooked ideas, but they all solve real problems. Okay, who hasn't had toms ringing or sustaining much longer than you want it to? Well, there are several ways to fix this. One is you just take a little piece of leather that you attach to the rim of the tom, and that is going to dampen the sustain of the tom. And when you hit the tom, the movement of the batter head is going to let the piece of leather fly up, release the sustain so that you get a clean attack, and dampening right when it's landing back on the head. Listen to the difference. You may have to experiment with different sizes of leather for different drum tunings, but this works really well. And the same also works for a snare drum, but since it is higher in pitch and is not going to be able to lift up a piece of leather, you can try with little pieces of fabric. It also works really well. This method doesn't kill the sound, it's just reducing the sustain. Another really old school trick that works all the time is just use some paper towel and a little bit of masking tape. You attach a little piece to the resonant head and it's going to shorten your tom right away. And the best about masking tape is you can remove it without getting any residue. Alright, another problem that we often face is hi-hat bleed into your snare microphone. And one way to reduce this significantly, especially in the high end, is a little device that is going to separate the microphone from the hi-hat. I borrowed this idea from Mr. Bruce Swedien, who recorded Michael Jackson. He made a similar device. His was square and straight. I tried to do something more angled so that we have a little bit more of a shield around the microphone, and it's working really well. Listen to this. As you can hear, especially the high end is reduced significantly, which really helps when you want to boost some crack into the snare or add compression to it. If you plan to build a device like this, try to use the heaviest materials that you can get your hands on. I used lead sheets in between of thin plywood layers so that it's really heavy and blocks sound well. In fact, it's so heavy that I need counterweights or the stand would collapse. Sometimes in a cymbal set you have one or two that are much louder than all the other ones. And one great way to reduce the volume of one cymbal is to use cym pads. Such a set consists of 6 foamy pads of different sizes. The bigger the size, the more attenuation you get, and they work really well because you just reduce the volume of the cymbal without killing the tone. The next detail that gets overlooked a lot is bass drum beaters. I often have drummers coming in, they just have the beater that has been on their drum pedal and they don't question it. But using different kinds of beaters is like building an EQ into your bass drum. For example, if you take a beater like this with very thin material, you just get a much more clicky and thinner sound than, for example, using a thicker beater like this one. Having a couple different ones at hand just to try them and see how the sound changes is really helpful. But not only the type of beater is important, but also the positioning. And I've seen this so often while recording drums that the beater is not properly aligned with the drum head, so that it's just touching at an angle with just the border of the beater instead of giving full contact. And you lose a lot of sound like this, especially low end, if the beater is not touching properly. So try to adjust it before recording. A long time ago I had a drum recording session where the drummer would flip around his sticks and hit either with the tip or with the backside of the stick, depending on which part he was playing. And I was wondering why he was doing this, and he said, yeah, with the tip you just get a thinner sound and you get a much heavier sound with a heavy tip without having to hit really hard. And I tried this, and you really get more weight by using the thick end of the stick. I liked it so much, in fact, that I bought myself sticks with thick ends on both sides. This may not work for every style, especially if you play something really fast, but maybe for a little heavier part, you want to try this out and see the difference. There are more tips coming, but if you liked it so far, leave me a like and a comment. I enjoy this, and especially it helps spread the video more and maybe help more people record the drums nicely. The first step while setting up a drum set in the studio is tuning it, and 80% of the time it's me who is going to tune the drums, because the drummer just really doesn't know how to tune his drums. There's a specific problem and he doesn't know how to attack it. And I learned a lot by watching this video. These are really solid methods that work all the time and help me a great deal tuning in good drum sounds. I will link to all the products in the description below, and I would also suggest that you watch this video where I show you how to get a lot of different sounds out of one snare drum with just a couple tweaks within seconds. Another great product if you need consistency in your tuning throughout the session is this one, TuneBot. This is a clip-on tuning device that will show you the note and the frequency range to which your drum is tuned. I don't use this to tune the drums from the ground up. I rather use the methods shown in the video, but this helps to keep consistency through the session, especially, for example, if you need to change the floor tom head mid-session and you just want to go back to the exact same tuning that you used before. This is really helpful. Now let's move on to some sound shaping tools. Everyone knows the good old sub kick, right? You just take a bass woofer from a speaker, either mount it into, like this, a snare shell, or just use a stand and place it in front of your bass drum, or even floor tom, and get a nice thick low end out of it. But there are other spare parts that you can use to build a low frequency microphone. For example, one side of a headphone. I had a pair of headphones where one side wasn't working anymore and it would have been too expensive to repair it, so I used the working side, just soldered an XLR connected to it, and now I have a kind of mini sub kick that works really well. You can use it, for example, on the bottom side of a floor tom, or you can use it in front of a bass drum to get some extra low end. You can also use it to record a guitar amp or a bass amp and just use it as you would use a sub kick to add a little extra low end to your recordings. Now I have a really cheap hack for you. It literally costs cents. If you need a sizzle cymbal and you don't have these sizzle chains that are most often used, you can just use a couple of coins, very small and light ones. Best is like 1 cent. You just take a piece of tape it to the edge of the cymbal, and you have a sizzle cymbal. Check this out. Recycling or upcycling is really cool, and if you have some old or broken, cracked cymbals, you can use them to make really nice sounding stacks. You can use such stacks as accent cymbals. I had a session 2 weeks ago where the drummer built a stack out of 3 or 4 different cymbals and used it basically like you would use a china. It sounded incredibly great. And sometimes for a special part you don't want the old boring hi-hat sound, so you can use old broken cymbals or splashes, or just combine different kinds of cymbals, mount them to your hi-hat stand, and you get a more creative, special sounding hi-hat. Now let's talk about the use of Clicktracks in the studio. I know a lot of drummers that have a hard time sticking to a normal, regular click. And what helps them a lot is adding another sound, like a shaker, for example. You can also use some other kind of loop, anything that just gives the drummer a little bit more feeling of groove instead of just having the old tick tock 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 in your head. I personally always use an audio track with my Clicktrack on it. I don't use a plugin or the built-in metronome. This has a couple of advantages. First, you can cut off the click after the last hit, so the click is not going to pass through the headphones into the overheads, leaving some click sound in the final fade out of your cymbals. Then another thing is you can add some hints into the click track for your drummer. For example, if he has to play 6 times the same groove and you don't want him to have to count everything, you can, for example, double the speed of the click just 2 measures before this part ends. So he has like an audio reminder that his part is soon going to end and he has to switch to another part without him having to count anything. You can also easily clip gain up and down some parts if, for example, one part is really quiet and you don't want to risk having the click coming through the headphones in your overheads, or just want the drummer to have a softer click for a softer part, so we will play softer. Having an easily customizable click track really helps in certain situations during recording. Alright, that was it. I hope you enjoyed these little tricks that have helped me a lot in real-time sessions. Let me know if you have some really cool tricks that you would like to share with me and the other viewers. I would really appreciate this. And see you in another video. Bye bye, take care.